think so. I think that at the micro level, at the data level, it's consistent self-improvement, right? And like loving the version of myself today, but then discarding that one tomorrow to build another one today.
Thank you for tuning in to the Elev8 podcast. I am your host, Tyler Johnson. This is the last episode of Season 2. And like Season 1, we are ending this season with a friend of mine from the state of Texas. My friend, Coach Campbell, has been a college football player at the University of Houston. He is a speaker and an author. He's got a book called Alpha Redefined. It's 12 servant leadership traits of legendary leaders. You can find him on Instagram and Twitter at Coach Cam Cares. Welcome to the Elev8 podcast, my friend, my man, Coach Campbell. Cam, welcome to the podcast. Excited to connect with you. I've known you for, almost going on close to a decade now. Early on, you were kind of a mentor to me, just getting in front of kids and really tickling that itch to go spread good vibes and teach kids stuff. But jumping in, man, I wanted to talk. How you feeling thinking about today with, all the things in the country, the murder of George Floyd and so many other, vicious brutalities and the movement that's really been felt worldwide. Talked about how you're feeling, man. What are you thinking?
So first off, it's good to see you, right? So we check in, a couple times a year, but it is good to kind of put a face, right? So it's like your mug looks the same. That's good. It's a mixed bag. So I feel grateful that George Floyd is from Houston. And that in the space of everything that's been going on, even with the rioting, which broke my heart, that even that was a relatively short window in the country's grieving process. But most importantly, like Houston, I feel like has done a really good job of making all of this centric to George Floyd. Like it hasn't taken on other legs or been, detracted from we're talking about the Drew Brees stuff. It's been about his memory and, really he was a martyr, I think that we wouldn't be at this point, at the time of this recording and having actual conversations about Max is taking Gone with the Wind off of their air because, there are several, the whole movie itself is oppressive and, and relatively inconsiderate. And so, that movie won, I think, Academy Awards and Grammys, and is hailed as like one of the best all-time movies. And so the whole idea of, in 2020, now this movie is offensive. Well, it was offensive when it was made. It was every year that we celebrate. Right? So it's no more now than it was then. But I think the idea of the country's awakening of we need to take a look at everything that we do, like literally everything. And so, I thought off of that, I was talking to one of my business partners and we're working on a contract and, there's a minority inclusion piece, right? And this is where the systemic piece of what we're going on gets kind of tricky. So on one hand, you say, okay, well, there's at least an 18% consideration for minorities on this project, which sounds great. But the other side to it is, as a minority, that means I only have 18% of the jobs that I can win typically because nobody ever goes over their minimum. But even that, I'm now competing with all these people in this small 18% space. And so you've got to really lowball your pricing just to have a chance to get a piece of that piece. Right. Well, as we're talking, we're going through our paperwork, making sure everything's lined up. And it's like, dude, our minority certification status says pending. I was like, pending? Like we did that in 2016. Right, so we go into the system, and it literally says like application submitted June 2016, June whatever, received the next day, status approval pending. And so you begin to work back the process of approval And it really, the point I'm making is there are so many systems that are set up in our culture to oppress and shortchange and ultimately dissuade or discourage progress. And so had he not had the foresight to go back and check that and make sure we're good to go, we would have never known. He would have eliminated ourselves, right? And so the whole idea, like, why does, obviously it doesn't take 4 years to approve a certification. It doesn't take 48 hours. You know what I mean? So it's a thing. Maybe you give it 72 hours for manual, process and quality. But the whole idea of here's an opportunity here's a pseudo opportunity that we're going to create in this 18%, but you got to jump through 37 hoops to get to that 18%, and then you jump through all 37. But yeah, we're still going to leave you at pending. And so I don't think the pending is malicious or intentional. I think the whole system of jumping through all these hoops just to get a bite just kind of speaks to the awakening that we have today that we just didn't have as a country before 2 weeks ago.
It's a good specific one of many, 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 many things, right? I mean, but I watched the Netflix's 13. Amazing piece of work, and just connecting so many things. I mean, it was great, and heartbreaking, and a lot of things. But you and I met through sports and the work you do with student athletes. You were a college football player. You've worked in the NFL with community programming down there in Houston with the Texans. Moving forward, how do you see sports as a role? And maybe even more specifically, I'd be curious how do you feel about the NFL and their very delayed understandings?
Yeah, so I think there are two things that heal our country. I mean, I don't know about other countries, but music and sports heal our country like nothing else.
For sure.
Right? And so from jazz pre-1960 into rock and roll integration into hip hop in the early 80s and evolving into today. I think that music has its space to heal, but to your point, sports. I think sports is the leader in healing our country, and so I think that the opportunities are huge. I think that the conversation of how comfortable are the masses, white men in control, how comfortable are they in the process of learning, but then in the process of stepping back to evaluate is the second one. And then the third one is working to heal. And so, the NFL is a good old boys club. I mean, it just, statistically at this point is what it is. And so I think before, the Rooney Rule, there was the feeling of, all people of color don't have a shot. And we're talking more than just being an athlete, right? We're talking ownership, front office work, GM. And so, the Rooney Rule put it out there. And again, like the example I used earlier, created the opportunity for there to be. So even if it's an obligatory interview, we're at least making an effort to interview a minority, which can be, again, a person of color, woman, whatever. But, the concerning part, and really I think the toughest part, dude, is our culture, our cancel culture as a country is so strong that I don't know that the movement that we're creating could backfire potentially if we don't allow white men space to step forward, which sometimes means stepping on the pile of crap, right? So you look at Drew Brees, Texas guy, Westlake guy, is the face, really probably the face of the Saints as a franchise in their history, right? I've got a ton of family in New Orleans. There is not a better advocate for, disenfranchised people in the city of New Orleans more than there is nobody else. So for him to, again, step forward, but then step in some crap, we've got to give folks space to step, no matter where they step, right? And so long as it's forward. And so, for him to then recant the flag thing and then to admonish President Trump, I think is super dope. And I think the first step in healing, but then the other side of it is, are those who are hurt willing to forgive and help heal those who are willing to step forward? And so, I think to answer your question about the NFL, for years there was the Kaepernick tied to the flag thing, which, I mean, again, I've got a flag on now. You know what I mean? Just it's not understanding that the liberties that people who fight for us allow us to have. We're all Americans, right? And so I think that NASCAR taking a very proactive stance in banning the Confederate flag, big step. And I think that, like most things, predominant leagues are cyclical. And so I think that if the NFL doesn't get this stuff together, that baseball or basketball is going to creep right back in there as the premier league in our culture.
Good points. Kind of also not just the role of sports, but also, working often with coaches and youth student athletes. What role do you see coaches playing in this, and maybe even more specifically to white coaches that might not have, they're not going to have the experiences, and probably going to be myself, admittedly, it's hard to say, when do you understand? When do you comprehend? It's a continual process.
So I had a really dope conversation with one of my really close friends. His son just graduated from high school, and he's about to start his college track career. And his college track coach wrote a letter, sent it out to the athletes, sent it out to the parents. And, the first thing it said is, not only does this university, but no matter where I go, right? So we're talking about the transient college coach now. So I could be recruited here, the next minute you're there. Yeah. But this is where I stand. And his message was, as a white man, I understand that things will never be the same after this George Floyd incident. And also understand that I'm committed to learning as much as I can, but understand that, there are literally 400 years of things for me to catch up on. So it won't be overnight, but just know that, it's a continual learning effort for me. And I think that that's all you can really ask for. But then I think off of that is you got to understand, as a person learns and gathers, and, all things being fair and considered, they still have the right to decide where in the gamut they sit. And I think that, I think the actual embracing of a new America today will play such a humongous recruiting tool. So not the stamp Black Lives Matter and Black Action Social, but the authentic, and you can tell when people's energy, but the actual authentic effort to re-educate themselves, I think will be a decided factor unlike no other when it comes to recruiting. But even, coming down into the amateur ranks.
Yeah. I know you've shared some personal stories with me, and being a college football player at the University of Houston. I think you and I are getting older, almost 20 years ago now. But I wouldn't want to line up and get in front of Cam though still. Was there a moment as a student athlete where you remember distinctly feeling the racism or the systematic kind of what the NCAA was? That
I think that racism in our culture. So first off, to take a step back, I think that what we have to embrace, everybody has to embrace, is every institution in our culture was designed. Again, these people are dead now, but they were designed by old white men for the advantages of old white men. Yep. Right. And so whether it was to the detriment of a person of color, like us being 3/5 of a man, or just in lack of consideration. So maybe while not even intentional, it's not in our consideration. So I don't know that I say I experienced racism, but the oppressive, and I think the NCAA is by force trying to figure out how to resolve themselves. And really, you can make the argument that was a tipping point a year and a half ago, right? Of like, hey, we got to figure this thing out. Yeah. So I remember very well sitting in my advisor's office, and he's my mentor. He's a rock star. He's an awesome guy. And we're kind of hanging out, making small talk. And I remember working on some homework, grabbing a pencil from his desk to do some homework. He has like a box of nuts on his desk, grabbing some of those, kind of snacking on those. And I called my mom from his phone. And this is always kind of hanging out, getting work done, study hall, whatever. And he finished and he said, "Do you realize you committed 3 violations?" Like he's like, "You can't use that pencil, you can't use that phone, and you can't eat those nuts." And so, so again, is there racism there? No. Is there a systemic embedded disadvantage? Yes. Right. And so from the small piece, and I'm not going to play, school of the poor, but for the teammates that I had that I knew literally what they ate at study hall, at food hall was all they got. The guy who's still hungry, who grabs those nuts, right? So, that mindset and that's a level of oppression, right? So just the idea of, I'm using this pencil to advance my education, which is what the NCAA is supposed to be about. But if I use a pen, I can't afford a pencil, but if I use this pencil that has the University of Houston on it, that's on your desk, that's a violation. And so just small trip ups like that. And again, I get it. You've got to police, where does a pencil end versus a car, SMU, with the Pony Express, right? But the whole idea of the educational system, having principles, laws, and practices in place that sequester the advancement of the education, I think is one of those like small little itty bitty, forces of oppression.
Yeah. Football's full of adversity, and life is. I know one of the things, as I've heard you speak, as a college athlete, you went through one of those dreaded seasons with no wins. Growing up as a kid, I had a couple of those. But what going through that, I mean, college athletes pour so much into it. There's hard work in, there's so many hours and blood, sweat, and tears and all those things. What drove you to keep competing when you're going through that?
So we went 0-11 in 2001.
If you can you remember the schedule? Because I've heard you list it, but I know it's a gauntlet.
So it was let me see. So it was Rice, UT, LSU. That was the year 9/11. So we were supposed to play Georgia at the end of the season. So that one got pushed back.
All right.
South Florida, Louisville, Southern Miss, like Marquette. Marquette didn't have football, but like we lost to Marquette. We lost to everybody. Just like not good. And so my takeaway from that season was 2 things. As easy as it gets to point to, I think we had 4 starting quarterbacks that year. As a coach, like if there's one position that's inconsistent, if you're quarterback, you're not going to have it. You know what I mean? You just not.
Right.
This guy got injured. It was like, oh, let's try that guy. So it's easy to say, well, quarterback play wasn't consistent, or, this guy went to the NFL last year, so there's a big gap, right? And so the first thing was like, can you put more pressure on yourself to improve than anybody else? Knowing that everybody in your locker room may not have that mindset and may point at you or your position and say, well, the reason we lost was, our defensive line allowed so and so and so and so, right? And so the first thing was, can you not only 100% be accountable for your actions and, your performance on the field, your performance in the locker room, classroom, whatever, but can you allow no one else to put more pressure on you than you? Which sometimes means I don't need your extra pressure, bro. Like, I've got it. Like, I'm putting all the pressure on me. The second thing is, I think the beauty of our sport is it's an orchestra, bro. Like, it really is an orchestra. So if one person's out of position, breaks technique, breaks assignment, busted assignment, it's a touchdown. Like, it just is. Mm-hmm. And the same thing on defense. On offense. And so, with that being said, the coaching staff we had that year was what's Bob Stoops' brother? I think Dave Stoops, I think is his name. So I think Dave Stoops was our DB coach.
Okay.
Dave Warner was our quarterback coach. He's the OC now at Michigan State. He's been there forever. Our offensive line coach won a Super Bowl with the Broncos in 2016.
Is that Clancy Barone?
Yep, Clancy Barone. Coach Bunkus was our defensive coordinator. He led those TCU defenses. I mean, so we had like a rock star young, but like rock star mega staff.
Yeah.
And so the whole identity for coaches is like not to own. I don't know that coaches or players can individually own what that record is, because it really is a gumbo that makes it work. From strength and conditioning to, academics, obviously, and ACE to food and diet and all that kind of stuff. So, that was a second thing. And I've been practicing, the art of stoicism for about a year now.
Awesome.
Marcus Aurelius, talks about being able to own and detach, right? And so I think that's kind of where that yin and yang comes in of I can completely own that I'll let nobody put more pressure on me than me to improve. But I also own that there's so much of this that I can't control. And like call it 120, 150 people on the staff, be it coaches, players, whatever, we all want the same thing. Like there's no question about that. So, there is this kind of middle space of owning it, but then not allowing it to be fatal.
Right. It's good advice. So that kept you fighting then. You kind of talked a little bit about what you've been into now. What keeps you fighting now, man? You got a baby on the way. I know you're an entrepreneur. You got you got a course out. Got a lot of things going on, man. What do you want? What are you fighting for? What do we got?
Man, so I think that at the micro level, at the daily level, it's consistent self-improvement, right? And so loving the version of myself today, but then discarding that one tomorrow to build another one today, right? I think as that applies during this COVID season, I think so. Back when you and I first met, I was 300 pounds, bro. I was rocking 3 bills and rocking with pride. You know what I mean? And so, so fast forward, you begin to work on your body, especially, as an ex-athlete, you get big, you get small. So I was down to like 250, I think 252. COVID hit. Whew.
I know. I started cooking more at home. I'm like, yeah.
Oh, they put an In-N-Out on the corner. The first In-N-Out in Houston, dude. They put it on the corner of my house. It's less than a mile away.
Oh man!
And I tell you, everybody that works there. You know what I mean? And so it's only during COVID. And so saying all that to say, it's like understanding that, as I work today in a micro level to regain my body physically, just as a small example, I've got to know that I'm going to commit everything and then put that in the box, put it away, and then rebuild that tomorrow. And so striving for true mastery, I think there's so many organizations that you and I are familiar with that have kind of abandoned what mastery truly is. And it's just, it's like lifelong learning and I think ambition plus patience. Yeah. Right. Is, I think, the closest definition of mastery.
I think too. I think for me, I always, for myself, and when I'm people always, student athletes and myself guilty too, you have goals and it's like, man, get consistent before you get too ambitious. Make sure your consistency is putting your ambitions in check. Because we all got goals, but man, what are you doing daily? And it goes back to I think just like you said, you got to have that balance, be able to forgive yourself and let go of yesterday and be determined and persevere for the next 24. Yeah.
And it's tough to do. Right. And so, Ryan Holiday wrote a series of books. The first one that I read was Ego is an Enemy.
Yep.
It's again in the space of stoicism and really just trying to, balance what that is and how that applies to today's athlete is, you and I had there was zero opportunity for us to be seen on TV, let grandma watch us on YouTube Live or whatever, right? Until we got to college.
Right.
Grandma can pull up your own private YouTube Live page and watch right? Time you're 5. And so we're almost force feeding ego into our athletes. But we're not, there's no space. The only space where we take the air out is sorry, kid, you didn't make it. Right. And so there has to be a release valve. If as a coach, we're going to pump, all this exposure, attention, level of exclusivity, into a kid, we've got to have an in-house way of humility, which kind of going back to 0 and 11, while I was never an overly obnoxious athlete, that was humbling, man. So, man, I think that at the micro level, at the macro level, it's just, it's that idea of just chiseling away like a block at a time and, setting these, quarterly, annual goals, and then, having the, whatever you want to call it, to revisit and, kind of standing in the mirror naked and say, okay, well, we got this accomplished. We fell short here, and let's rebuild. And I think that allows you to scaffold, if you're able to have those conversations with yourself.
No doubt. Speaking of conversations with yourself, if you could get in a time machine and go back and see 16-year-old Cam, 16-year-old Cam, what if you had a few minutes to whisper something in your 16-year-old self's ear, what advice would you remind yourself of?
Oh my gosh. I can't believe you asked me. All right, so 16. Okay, so I would tell myself, I'm gonna love on myself a little bit first. So my parents are awesome. They were relatively liberal parents, and so one of the first things I did when I was able to drive, and they set kind of like your curfew, was I always came in 10 minutes early from curfew, because I knew that like if I came in early, that they'd always say yes. Mm-hmm. Right. So I never even came close to like pushing that boundary. And so I'd say like keep that mentality, right? So keep every barrier in your life in a position where the answer is always yes. I would also say you need to break yourself so you can learn what hard work is. And so I'll be honest, I mean, like most athletes, got very far on natural ability, or just even in life. I mean, in business, in my family as a Christian, I think, the sooner you push yourself to failure, and you have to realize sometimes other people can't push you. So the idea of this coach putting an adversity in front of you, or this teacher, or whatever it is, like sometimes you have to be willing to go into that dark space. And I can say at 16, while I was hardworking and willing to work hard, I did not know I didn't know the depth of my ability and talent. And so that's the second thing. I think the third thing is, stay anchored to your faith. And, I think I did a pretty good job doing that, but I think it's one of those things that, you just gotta, at 16, geez, that's an age right there. I think it's an 18. Okay. Do this 16. Yeah. Whew, that's a tough one.
Yeah. I think, it's good advice there. So last thing we always like to wrap up with, Cam, it's been great. You can find Cam's information all linked up to the podcast here, but how do you define success?
So success to me is defined by a progressive step forward. The older you are, the more you have to redefine things. I think most of us spend our 20s convinced that we know everything. We spend, hopefully, the early or most of your 30s realizing that there's some, kind of going back to the beginning of the conversation, there's so much yet to learn. And so I think that there's this Tony Robbins quote. He says something like, most people underestimate what they can do in a year, or most people overestimate what they can do in a year, but they grossly underestimate what they can do in 5. And so I think the idea of get better every day, and embracing your weaknesses, I think is a sign of success. And as a creative, I've spent the last 3 or 4 years working on my weaknesses in business, and I got to the point last year where nobody would believe if I ever said this, but I actually love process now. I've never been a process guy. Like, just give me the paintbrush, I'll figure it out. Right? But you can't scale without process and systems. And so that's what I say is like a constant step forward. Even if it's not at the same meter or pace, it's constant forward. That's what success is.